I'd been selected as a member of the CBS board and later became chairman of it for 3 years. And so I had a lot to do that way, and conventions and so forth to visit and travel to. And so as I say, I kept busy. The thing I like about broadcasting is that, and especially with KSL, where KSL was #1, you know, and the ultimate of everything. You got tuned to everything. Nothing escaped you, and you're kept up to date on everything that happened, locally, nationally, and so forth. And I enjoyed that so much. I reveled in that type of activity, not because it was a highfalutin thing, but it kept me informed, and I always liked that. When I left KSL and was called as the executive VP and COO of Bonneville in 1971, 72, and that's when I was given the direction of all the stations to take charge of them, to attend their board meetings and so forth. So I did. I traveled quite a bit. What was great? It was really great. I had, at that time, President Lee was the president of the church, and he seemed to take a liking to me, and he sort of was my sponsor. And there were people who did not want me in that job, but President Lee said that's where I was going to be, and I had that job. It was very exciting, getting to meet all sorts of people, most of them not LDS, but in all the various cities of Chicago, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, and New York, and I'd get to their board meetings. We call them affiliates board meetings once a month. So I had quite a travel schedule. Arch Madsen was a great proponent for shortwave radio, and he wanted me to get indoctrinated in shortwave radio, which is mainly South America and Central America. So he arranged for me to travel for 3 weeks with Walter Canals, who was a convert to the church from Uruguay. So Walter and his wife and his daughter acted as our guides for my wife and me and our son Kevin, and we traveled all through Central America and South America, and had great meetings and met very influential people, and got to observe shortwave radio down in South America. And of course down there it was very big. It's now been replaced by FM station now, but it was big at that time, and the church had a big shortwave operation out of New York that they had bought, and with it they got an FM station, which later became WRFM in New York, their prime key FM station, and so that was a major thing. And in fairness to my boss, Arch Madsen, it was he who saw the future of FM radio unlike anybody else, and so he promoted that very much with the church, and the church has since profited very much from his foresight. See, I think that was about 73 when we took that trip. Arch was, again, he was very understanding. He insisted all of us, all of his managers, and me particularly, have 2 or 3 AMA courses each year. And so we would go down to California and go to the AMA courses there, management courses. They were very instructive and very helpful to me. And I owe Arch a great deal of gratitude for those opportunities. We would have the finest of national executives come and conduct seminars with us and sessions with us at the headquarters of AMA there, and it would teach us the fundamentals of management and personnel relations and so forth. We didn't get into unions or all that stuff, but we learned so much from those shots. I got to meet him at board meetings and so forth, and I got to make presentations. I guess he just liked the way I did things. Anyway, a very good friend of mine. Mainly in executive committee and board meetings with him, where he'd be conducting those meetings as president of the church, you see. And so I would just get to see him at that time and meet with him. And he was very good. He was tough, I got to tell you. President Lee was a tough curmudgeon. He didn't brook any playing around with the broadcast, and he was always fair. But I remember one time, one of our board members, who I won't name at this time, but anyway, he raised a question on a situation that had emerged at the company, and President Lee, just right in front of everybody, he said, calling him by name, he said, "The problem with you is you just don't listen when you ought to be listening." Oh, he put him down real good. And very frankly, it made us all feel good because this guy had been a tough nut, and President Lee really shaped him up. I always had my sights set on becoming a manager of KSL, because at that time KSL was the big station in the country. And so when I moved up from program director to sales manager, from sales manager to assistant manager, and finally to manager, and that was a real important position, and it puts you on the #1 list of all things in Salt Lake and region. You're always invited to everything if you're on that #1 list. And so I felt it was a great stature thing, and I have to admit I was always aware of my status and things, not for financial reasons, but for just it helped me put aside all those things at East High and so forth when I was so socially inept and unaccepted, you know. And so it helped build my ego. Well, when I was on the CBS affiliates board, at each annual meetings, we would have the top dogs of CBS. We'd have Walter Cronkite, we'd have Arthur Hull Hayes, we had Bill, the head of all of CBS, Bill, oh golly, what's his name? Anyway, he owned CBS. And I remember when we got our award for broadcasting, I got to go back and got to meet with Arthur Hull Hayes and Bill, oh gee. Anyway, he was the boss of everything. And I got to have lunch in the boardroom up on the umpteenth floor, you know, and all that bit. And yeah, I got in some pretty heavy territory there. You're scared to death. You'd worry about making a boo-boo, you know, and so forth. But when I got relaxed, I found that they were just like the rest of us. And as I used to say, they put on their pants one leg at a time, you know. And it taught me some great things, that people are people. And if you're kind to them, if you're honest with them, they respect you for it. And of course, they knew that I always knew that I was a Mormon. And in fact, one time at one of our meetings, maybe, I don't know if Noma told you this or not, but one of our meetings, we were sitting next to a drunk a fellow from Wyoming. He was a broadcaster in Wyoming. Nice guy, but he was drunk. And he said, "We ought to have a word of prayer here." And George Arcadis, who at that time was a manager of CBS Spot Sales, he said, "Well, you're right. He said, "But who could pray?" And this guy said, "Well, Joe's a Mormon. He can pray." And so they asked me to pray and bless the food. And so I did. And, you know, I didn't feel that I was put down at all. I felt that I had gained some status with everybody there. We planned one big trip with all of our children where we arranged to pick up a Volkswagen van in Holland Airport, Schiphol Airport. And so at that time we were going over to meet our son Greg as he concluded his mission in London. And we met him, and then he joined all of us, and we had all the kids in this big van, and we traveled all through Europe, Holland, Germany, England, Denmark,
Italy,
Greece. We just had a great time.
I don't think we were ever out of the car. We were driving someplace, but it's something that children will always remember.
We were having trouble getting the girls to stay home, and so we decided to take them to Europe on a special trip. And we found out that our two daughters just viewed it as a tennis tour. So they'd look for the tennis courts when we landed any place, and there we'd find them. In fact, we got to Florence, where we were going to see all these marvelous things in Florence, you know, those golden doors and all that bit. And the girls didn't ever see it because they were playing tennis. So,
they knew every tennis court in Europe.
We had a great time with them.
But Kevin went with us.
We picked up a car at that time in Stuttgart, bought a new Mercedes, which I was turning back over to Kjar so they'd have increased their inventory. But we traveled all through Europe in that new Mercedes, and that was quite a trip.
Well, then talk about our trip in 1974.
Yeah, in 1974 we arranged to go to Montreal, Canada to pick up our son Scott, who had completed his mission there in Quebec. And we had a great time there with Scotty in Montreal. And we had Greg and Sue come back and meet us in New York, and we had made arrangements with a fellow who was one of the supervisors of Howard Hughes, and he had access to Howard Hughes' penthouse suite in New York, and he arranged to get it for us for a whole week. So we had all of our children in that penthouse suite just off Columbus Square in New York. We had a great time there.
It was so funny when we were picking Greg up. As soon as Greg and Scott saw each other in Brussels, they wrestled in this wonderful hotel filled with antiques. We were so afraid they were going to ruin something. As soon as we pick Scotty up and he meets Gregory in New York, it's another wrestling match after all those years. And then talk about our radio stations that we visited in South America.
Well, at that time, in 1975, Bonneville, well, it wasn't Bonneville at that time, it was KSL, was pursuing shortwave radio. And so we had this PR trip to visit all the shortwave radio stations in South America and Central America. And had quite a trip that way. our guide took us to Machu Picchu, and we went there and spent, what, a whole day, wasn't it? And got to see that marvelous, marvelous thing. And then went to Brazil and saw the Iguazu Falls, and there we picked up
I got salmonella
food poisoning. Stayed with us the rest of the trip. Listening to all his church calling me about as exciting as watching grass grow. But we had a variety of church callings. Started in 1947 with the MLA General Board, and then 1952, second counselor to a bishop at Edgehill Ward in Salt Lake when we lived on 13th East there, across from Westminster College. Then 1960, first counselor to Bishop Duncan here in Centerville after we moved out here to Centerville. And then I was Bishop of Centerville 4th Ward, and then Davis Stake President in 1969. Then they moved me into regional representative from 1973 to 1983 when I was selected or called as a mission president to the Philippines.
It was announced today that one of our bosses here at KSL will be leaving us soon. Joseph Kjar, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of our parent company, Bonneville International Corporation, has been called to serve as a mission president for the LDS Church. At the same time, he'll be retiring from Bonneville. Mr. Kjar is a 37-year veteran of broadcasting and has been with KSL since 1946, starting as a staff announcer. We on the news staff want to add our thanks to the rest of the companies to a man who's been a great friend, colleague, and supporter of our efforts over the years. Our loss is the LDS Church's gain.
One thing I was proud of Joe, when he had to take early retirement to go on our mission. He only had 2 years left, he would have been retired. But they wanted to give him a great big party, a retirement party. And Joe said, no, I don't want that. You save your money. But he went around every single office in KSL and Bonneville and said goodbye to them before he left, personally.
We love the Philippines. I didn't think we would. I was kind of disappointed to be called there to begin with, but once we got over there and got to know the people and have the missionaries that we had about 120 missionaries working with both natives and Filipino and Anglo. Yeah. But anyway, we had a great time with them, and they were so kind to us and loving to us, and the Filipino people are very loving people. So we formed some wonderful, close relationships there. And we watched several miracles that were part and parcel of the calling of the mission president. And we had some challenges, some young people that just didn't want to settle down and do the job. But anyway, we had generally great success with our young missionaries. And
one thing I admired about Joe as being a mission president, he knew how to delegate. And he would have his assistants do as much as they could because he was training them. And he really trained young people to be leaders.
In the Philippines, we were privileged to get Susie, our youngest daughter, called on a full-time mission to join with us in the Philippines, missionary, and fulfill the full missionary there. And she was a great, great missionary.
And then Kevin visited several times.
And Kevin, on his way back from Fiji, he came with us and visited with us. Then when he got home and got married Anita, then they came back over to the Philippines and spent some time with us there.
But he got us on the computer. And when we went over there, no missions had computers. And we got someone that was going to Hong Kong to bring us back a computer. And so they did, and it was our own personal computer. And when Kevin came through, he taught us how to use it, or taught the office staff how to use it.
And he learned. I mean, he studied the manual on the plane from Fiji. He didn't know anything about a computer any more than we did. But he learned, and by the time he got to the Philippines, he was an experienced manual educated computer man. And so he taught our elders and our couples there how to work the computer.
It made being a mission president so much easier because all the zone leaders would call in how many, the proselyting hours and the study hours, and they'd put it in the computer. And when Joe would have zone meetings, they'd just give him the printout and say, here it is. And so the zone leaders could see how their zones were doing. And when we came home, they were baptizing around 600 a month. It was fabulous. And we decided you can't baptize unless you have proselyting, what do I want to say? Where you go talk to people. Discussions. And so when we got there, they were averaging around 6 discussions a week, and they were getting it up to 15 or 16 discussions a week, which was very helpful. And those were good baptisms. My father died Halloween night while we were in the Philippines from cancer, pancreatic cancer. Both of Joe's parents died with strokes. And we decided when we left on our mission that if this should happen, that I should stay in the mission field. So we called Joe's old secretary and gave her a message, and she wrote it down and gave it to Kevin, I think, to read at my father's funeral. And then after we got home in 1988, my mother was 92. She passed away here in our home, just from old age, I guess.
I admire her for holding fast to what the agreement she had with him to stay in the mission field. So many times missionaries just automatically pick up and go on home. But Noma felt too committed to her mission call, so she stayed there.
Well, when we'd had several missionaries who had stayed, and they gave me the example too. They'd stayed when their parents. That was one of the hard things about being a mission president, was to have to call a young man in and tell him that one of his parents had died. So many times I want to ask Mother something and she's not there, but I try to remember the things that they've taught us. And my parents always taught us to pay your bills, to be honest, to be thoughtful and kind of other people. And your parents were the same, weren't they?
Yeah. Your dad was a hard-nosed banker. He didn't buy anything unless you could pay for it. And he didn't go in debt except for a home. That's the only thing Dad would warrant, was going in debt for a home. In 1987, after we got back from our mission, and we had bought a place down in St. George, and a friend of ours whom we knew from New York was chairman of the Dixie College National Advisory Board, and he asked me to serve on that board. So we served on the Dixie College Advisory Board for, probably 7 or 8 years. And also at that time, I was selected by the Brethren to serve as the church's representative on the governor's alcoholic board to help control the alcoholic legislation. That was very interesting. And it's interesting to see how the church's position would try to meld with the feelings of the constituency in Salt Lake. And they were not always sympathetic to each other, and a lot like what it is today with.
Well, didn't you get rid of the little bottles?
Yeah, we got rid of the little mini bottles and got it so they could order the drinks by the drink. And of course, to some people, that was a big move in the wrong direction. But in fairness to the committee, we controlled the access to alcohol much better than it would have been otherwise. But yeah, we had a great time with that. Got to meet a lot of good people.
And then just before we went on our mission, you were president-elect of the Salt Lake Rotary.
Yeah, I would have been president of the Salt Lake Rotary stayed another year or two. But of course we had to give it up. So when we went to Palmyra, we were quick to join the Rotary Club back there. It became very important. Not very important, but a very
Well, the only two
part of it.
LDS members on the Rotary, and they were very kind to us, though, and they had just started using the Rotary to prepare food for the pageant, so they were very excited.
Well, the Rotary Club was so involved with the food with the pageant that it soon became their pageant, the Rotary Club's pageant. And I served on the board for the Rotary Club in Palmyra, so we got to stay right close to the thing. And it got us in contact with some very fine people in that whole county. And
I guess this was, when we got there, this was their second year that they had done it. But each year they'd make more, well, they were making, what, $40,000, $50,000 for their club just by selling food at the pageant. And it really served a great purpose because there was no place in Palmyra to buy food.
And it was not to our credit. We didn't pull that off. The fellow whom we succeeded as director of sites in Palmyra was the one who got it going, got it started. We just came in and helped foster it along.
And then Joe and I were asked to be chairman of the Centerville Centennial Celebration, which lasted a whole week. If that wasn't something. This was in 1989, and you know it rained practically the whole week. But we had a wonderful committee. Everyone in the town joined, and then that same year, the Rotary came back and named Joe Citizen of the Year and gave him a wonderful plaque.
They didn't have anybody else to name, so they picked me.
No. 1995, we had our 50th wedding anniversary where, remember?
St. George.
St. George. And we spent, we rented out 2 condos, or 1 condo besides ours. And we went every place, to the sand dunes.
Yeah. And we made arrangements. The bishop of the ward there was one of my former priests. I brought him along, and he let us have the whole ward for our various activities. So we were able to play basketball and all that bit right in the ward gymnasium there. So we had a real fine time.
And our anniversary is November the 30th. So we were all down there for Thanksgiving. So we cooked our turkeys there and had a regular Thanksgiving dinner right there in the Bloomington Chapel. Then tell them about our wonderful reunion at Kristen's home.
Oh yeah,
1997.
Chris and Greg. Chris is our oldest daughter. She and Greg had just purchased a beautiful home right on the shores of Lake Minnetonka in Minneapolis. A lovely place, and so we all gathered there at her place for our next family reunion. And we had all the kids, the whole bit. And Greg, of course, had his boats out there and the surfboards and all that bit, so we had a great time.
We were there almost a week.
Yeah,
Like
the kids just had a ball.
Some of them were on missions, Kimball was. But we had it in July, and it seems like we had a birthday cake every single night. We were there because it was somebody's birthday. Well, it was a theme that, like Joe said this year, in the church, faith in every footstep. So we thought we'd carry it on, and our whole reunion was around that theme. So we sat out on their deck off of their house one afternoon, and we chose a different color for each family, and we painted one of their feet and let them give their footprint there. You can see little tiny prints, big prints, and it's very meaningful to us to have a footprint from each member of our family.
Out in our flower patch out on the west of the house here, we have 3 big concrete plaques, one each for Chris and Greg's sons.
Well, they're steps, really.
They're steps, and they have they've made their imprint, and so they're still there.
They have their hands and their foot.
Yeah. Our youngest son, Kevin, has been working for this big international outfit where he travels all around, and he can make his office wherever his home is. And at that time, his home was in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. And so he made arrangements to rent several condominiums for our family. And so we all went back there in Chincoteague. Now Chincoteague is famous for its herd of small animals, small horses. They're not ponies, but they're smaller than regular sized horses. And they were left there by Spaniards or whomever, and they have so procreated, they've got quite a herd there.
Well, they had a shipwreck, and
so every year they round them up and swim them from one island to the other for the roundup. And so we got to go there and have our family reunion at that time. And it was very interesting to watch them do that.
it's right on the Atlantic Ocean, and we took back kites, homemade kites I'd made, and we flew them out on the beach. The first time I'd really ever flown a kite. We had so much fun flying kites there on the beach.
We finally got them up in the air. Yeah, we learned a lot about kite making at that time. And there's a very fine kite shop on the island. And so when our kites wouldn't go up, we went there and Noma found out what was wrong with our kites, and we engineered the change and got these kites flying way up high.
And then in 1999, we joined BYU Travel Study, and we followed Paul's path all through Turkey and Greece. And the professors that took us on this tour were fabulous. They spoke Hebrew, and they could see all of these old ancient writings on the wall, and they could read all of them. But it was a wonderful trip. I didn't realize how beautiful Turkey is, and how much, well, there was a little town in Turkey we went to where John took Mary, the mother of Christ, after he was crucified, and she lived there the rest of her life. But all of these places we would visit, and they'd tell us what Paul had said about the different areas.
We weren't smart enough to argue with them. in 2000, we had found out that that was the year of the Passion Play in Oberammergau, Germany. And so we arranged a tour, and for just Noma and me.
Oh, we're with BYU.
And we made the tour over to Oberammergau and attended the Passion Play. Of course, it was all in German, but it was very interesting. And then also on the way there, we got to see the what was it? William Tell. William Tell's.
I don't know, festival.
Festival, and also in Germany, not far from Oberammergau. And so we got to see that too. And it was great. A great trip.
The professor that took us was the German teacher down at the Y. So he spoke German beautifully. And then after that, we went on what they call the Romantic Road through the middle of Germany. And on this road are all of these little ancient villages that still have walls around them. What do you call them? You could walk around the wall on top.
Inside,
and they were little towns, no cars were allowed. But it was one of the most interesting, I guess there were about 7 or 8 of these little villages along this romantic road. And then in 2001, with BYU Travel Study, we followed Paul's path through Italy. We didn't know he went to all of these wonderful places. And we drove on the Amalfi. We were driven on the Amalfi Drive.
You can imagine a big Mercedes bus driving those narrow roads on Amalfi Drive.
With precipices down.
Quite a thrill.
It was marvelous. And now, since all this terrorism, no more BYU study. We feel bad because you learned so much, and it was so interesting. In 2002, it was our family's turn to do the Kjar reunion for all of Joe's brothers and sisters. So we did it at Sugar House Park, and we had an Olympics, and it was a lot of fun to organize, but we won't get it again for another 14 years. Thank goodness.
Now we're consumed with watching our state champion grandchildren wrestle with a brief time off now until Danner, who is Scott's youngest son, starts his reign. And a new game that we've been introduced to is rugby through Kimball and Taylor. And then we also have a couple of them pursuing lacrosse, which we knew nothing about. And to watch them play that game was quite a thrill. And that's by our 2 Josephs, Joe Ostrander and Joe Carroll and Kevin's son.
Kimball is on the USA team, rugby team, that plays right now. He's in Canada, playing there. And we had, of course, family home evening each Monday night when we could. And in those days when our children were young, I think we missed the boat many times. We played rather than taught scriptures and taught things, you know, that they do nowadays in family home evenings. And then we have a Christmas Advent every year. We all meet on Christmas Eve here and go caroling to about 6 different people. And then we come back and have, well, we've been having something warm. What did we have this year? Did we have, no, that spaghetti's after.
Yeah, April Skeevers generally.
April Skeevers, And anyway, this is something we do every year, is go caroling. And then have an Advent one Sunday when we talk about Christ's birth. And then we try to have temple sessions together, but this got to the point where everyone got so busy that we all had to kind of go on our own now. And I'm so pleased that they are doing it.
One thing we have held on to and have done a pretty good job with it is following each general conference, the priesthood meeting, all of the priesthood sons, grandsons, gather together at our home here for spaghetti dinner at the conclusion of that priesthood meeting. We had quite a fine time there.
But it's getting,
it's now become a family-wide.
yeah, the wives join us and all the grandchildren, and we have lots of fun. Let's see. Oh, and one of the activities we've so enjoyed, usually around the 4th of July, is a water fight. And of course, the last several years we couldn't have one because of the drought. But we go down here in this field, and we divide up into teams, and we have water in big tubs, and we have different games we play. And we even had a water slide out here. And one time Joe tried to do it and fell down and hit his head.
And got a slight concussion, had to go to the hospital. Had a pretty good percentage with all of our grandsons and many of our granddaughters serving full-time missions, and they've pretty well covered the whole globe. We've had a couple in Russia, and of course our family in Philippines, and our son in Fiji,
Honduras,
and so we've covered
Sacramento.
Yeah.
But then too, it seems that when the granddaughters went on mission, one went to Brazil, and one of our granddaughters went to the Philippines,
Yeah.
Katie.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got married, they married men that had been on missions to Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't remember where else. But anyway, we're proud of all of them. And it seems that's really where you cement your testimony, is on your mission, or get a testimony.
Our oldest son, Gregory, who has become a doctor, a plastic surgeon, and he's a doctor in the truest sense of the word. He just returned from a mission,
Peru.
where he did cleft palates and so forth. And he does that about every year.
Greg's wife, Sue, is a super organizer, very thoughtful and kind, and we've loved having her as our daughter as much as, and we feel that all of our children have made good choices when it comes to choosing a mate.
And then our oldest daughter, Kristen, she's attended every college and university in the state, but she's one of these terrifically talented people, very loving and kind and thoughtful, and she's married to a fine young man, Gregory. He's not a member of the church, but he's a fine fellow, top flight, and he supports Chris and whatever she needs to do for the church.
Very patient with all of us.
Very patient with all of us. And Chris's husband, Greg, that's G-R-E-G-G, has his master's degree, so compassionate, thoughtful of others, and an understanding of our LDS family values. And then Scott is our lawyer son, has a keen sense of humor and an honest business attitude, which we admire, and just recently made a bishop. He's doing very well in that. And Stana, who is Scott's wife, is about the most compassionate and thoughtful person you could ever meet. She'll help anyone in need, and she goes out of her way to do that.
They taught us when they were first married, when one would leave, one would say, "Love you," and the other one would say,
"Love you more."
"Love you more." So that's become more or less their password.
And our youngest daughter, Susie, is she's just she's gone through a rough road of in and out of the church. Now she's 100% in the church and doing a fine job. She's been a stake president of the MIA and all that bit. And she's known throughout her neighborhood as Mrs. Compassionate. And she's done a great job there. And
she keeps all of our children organized here. When are we going over to work in the yard and help Mom and Dad?
And her husband Gordy is a lovable fellow. Has a great heritage. He comes from the Navy family, which is a very historic name here in Davis County. And Gordy we couldn't have selected a better son-in-law than Gordy.
Kevin?
And then Kevin, oddly enough, we christened him as Kevin, but for some reason he decided we wanted Kevan, so he goes as Kevin. And he's our corporate consultant who is creative in his thought process. He demonstrates love for family. He'll call us from wherever he is. Like last night he called us from England, where he and his son Joseph are on a tour there in connection with one of his workshops. They're on their way to France, and he's very thoughtful of his whole family. And he's very, very capable. He has his master's degree, and he married a great lady by the name of Anita Esplin. And she is a great balance for Kevin because she keeps him, not
grounded.
without letting him make too many
feet on the ground.
Wild commitments.
But of course, Greg has his doctorate, Scotty is a lawyer, and Kevin has his master's degree, and Greg Ostrander has his master's.
And I'm the only one without a degree. I have no degree whatsoever.
Well, he could have had he came back from his mission and went right into the service. He didn't have a chance to go back to college, and then after he got working at KSL, he didn't want to take the time out to go back to college. But anyway, we feel so lucky to have such wonderful children who've chosen wonderful spouses.
The thing that thrills me about it more than anything else is how each of them have stayed true to the church. And even Greg O, who is not a member of the church, has the same values as our kids who are members of the church. And he not only prospers them, but he adheres to them himself. And we're so thrilled with the way our family has held fast to those things that we hold fast to. The gospel, the Book of Mormon, and the prophet, head of our church. And how they stay true to each other, keep their family together. And we keep our fingers crossed that they'll stay that way. And that would be our best desire for our families, for our children and our grandchildren, and now our great-grandchildren, hold fast those things they know to be right.
And Joe, he's my best friend. And I didn't know until after
Here comes a prop watch.
were married. Well, I didn't really realize it until 30 years later what a neatnik he is. You'll go into his dresser and every stocking is in the right place. All of his clothes are folded neatly, put away. Everything. He's so neat about everything he does.
And I do all the laundry.
Yeah, he loved. We've taught him now. When we had pink garments for a long time. what he washes when. But I think the thing that thrills me so much about Joe is his love for other people. He's a people person, and he used to remember everybody's name, and he would call them by name. But we're getting to the point now where it takes two of us to make a conversation, but one can't remember, the other will. But I always felt after I married Joe that he'd get me to heaven with his testimony, and I didn't need one. But I found out that I'm supposed to have one too.
You gotta have one.
Because he loves the Lord, and he wouldn't do anything that he knew was wrong. He would be honest and true in everything.
Well, we both come from great parentage. Her parents were just as true to the church as were my parents. And they taught us all these things. And they lived all these things with us.
And we found out how important it is to pay your tithing. And whenever we would have a rough time, Joe would always say, "Are we up to date with our tithing?"
We adhere to 4 basic things. Pay our tithing, family home evening, the word of wisdom, and what's the other one?
I don't know, family prayer?
Family prayer, yeah. Very seldom we go without family prayer night and morning. And we've raised our children that way. And they follow in our footsteps.
It was easier when we had all the children. Now, Joe always says prayers, say in the morning, I say them at night, and then by our bed, and then every so often we'll switch, and I'll say them in the morning, he'll say them at night. But it's important, and we feel like we need the Lord's help.
Well, I paid her when I married this lady. She's just, without a doubt, the finest. And I never thought I'd find anybody equal to my mother, but I did. I found this gal, and she's been every bit what Mother would have wanted me to marry.
But we both have a testimony, really. We know the church is true, and it became such a thrilling experience while we were back at the Hill Cumorah to study the Book of Mormon with the people that were there, and to try to tell it to other people that would come into the center how true the Book of Mormon is. And this is what makes us different from all other churches. If it weren't for that, we'd be like the other churches. But it is a second testament that Jesus is the Christ.
We always encourage our children, and tried to do it when we were raising them, to have their patriarchal blessing at the right time, and then have them refer to their patriarchal blessing frequently and live so as to see that their blessings are fulfilled. It's one thing to get a blessing, it's another thing to work towards fulfilling it. And we have prayer each night and morning. And the great Book of Mormon doctrine that wickedness never was happiness, we've learned that by sad experience. And although we haven't had extreme wickedness, but we value very, very heavily the name Kjar, K-J-A-R. It's a weird one, it's a funny spelling, and many people wonder where you got it, but we live so as to bring honor to that name, to my dad and my mother and Noma, to her folks. And
in my patriarchal blessing it says that my children will bring honor to my name, and I know that my children have heard this so many times, but I've lived all my life waiting for them to become famous, to bring honor to my name. All of a sudden it dawned on me, the lives they are living has brought honor to our name. And they have really been fabulous children, and I'm so grateful for them.
at this point, we want to recount our blessings. And as we think of our blessings, we think our greatest blessings are in our family and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and of course their parents. And so we're going to take you right through the genealogy of all of our family and give you an update on where we stand with them. We'll start with Greg and Sue's family, and we have a great Florence Nightingale in that family, Kelly. Kelly is a real Florence Nightingale, and she married a great man by the name of Greg Gamet. And
they have two cute children, Lauren and Ava, and they're now living in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Mason is our master teacher, and he's teaching at a non-LDS school, the
Bowling Hall.
And he married a Montana gal, Kim Kranz, and they have 3 great children, Gabriel, the oldest, and Alexander and Sydney. All 3 very active.
Very darling children.
Rona,
And then there's Kimball, and he's our rugby star, and he married a cute girl, Chesney Thomas, and they have a little one, don't they?
and Kimball travels all over the country following the rugby teams. He's done so well. In fact, he almost won them a championship up in Canada just this past weekend. We all love Chesney very much. She's a great gal, and she puts up with Kimball being away most of the time on these rugby jaunts.
Chesney's pregnant, and she has an adorable little girl already, Caslin, and Chesney's new baby is going to be born in August, another little girl. Taylor was our phlebotomist, but he dropped that. He's now working, doing flooring to get the money to take care of his brand new wife, and then he'll go back to BYU. He's not quite sure what he wants to do. What about his wife?
His wife is Stacy. She's from Bountiful, right here in this area, and her maiden name is Craig,
Oh,
and she's a very talented gal.
and Stacy's grandfather is our stake patriarch over in Centerville.
Oh yeah, Brother Call. Well, Mallory is our sweetheart. That she's our ski instructor and landscaper, and she takes care of our lawn so beautifully. And she married a fellow also from around this area named Brett Stahl, S-T-A-H-L. And Mallory her real love is ski instructor and landscaper, but she's a very, very talented gal.
Well,
And they just recently got married.
and Brett is a avid bicyclist, so we may see him in the Tour de France someday. All right, let's get to Greg and Kristen's children.
They, of course, are living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, have a beautiful home right on the shores of Lake Minnetonka. And they have 3 sons. Their oldest is David. We call him our movie mogul. He's sort of he's very involved in production right now. And then Joseph O is he's a lacrosse star, and he's traveling all over to play lacrosse, and is a very capable guy. He's a little red-headed fellow, but very, very muscular and very active. And then, of course, the youngest is Gregory, a very talented musician, plays piano, plays violin. They're all very musical. And, of course, Greg and Chris have done so very well. Our next special blessing comes through Scott and Stana. And we'll start with Mandy. Mandy is sort of our singer siren. Has a beautiful voice and has exercised it very well. And she haunted Dave Wilkinson to marry her, and they live in West Salt Lake. I just bought a home and I'm just redoing it now.
Well, and Dave, her husband, Wilkinson, is just as talented as Mallory is, and they have 2 cute children, Emma and Graceland. Then there's Katie, our gourmet homemaker.
But also very musical too. All of Scott and Stana's children are very musical and very talented.
Well, they had a band, a care band, where they all performed. But Katie married Tyler Edwards, and they have a brand new baby named Kalia. It almost sounds Hawaiian, but she's a cutie.
Then Lucas is our mountain man. He's about ready to get married, and he's very important. He's a great wrestler. Took many titles while he was wrestling, but he's now in the process of selling cars, and he's doing quite well with it. But he's set to marry Rebecca,
And she's from Idaho.
she's from Idaho. She's from Burley, isn't she?
I'm from Burley, yes. Another one from Burley. And then Ben is on his mission in Arizona. And we wrote down here, we've written these little things for the children, just one of the outstanding traits. And we put down for him everything is possible, because it really is. Whatever Ben sets his mind to do, he accomplishes it. And it's so fun to read his emails. He's talking about this one town that they go to, and he's going to change everything in that town, and he will.
And then Adam, who is just still in the MTC, studying Japanese to fulfill a mission there. And he's our Fred Astaire. He took ballroom dancing at the Y and excelled in it very well. And he's a very capable fellow.
BYU, Idaho.
BYU, Idaho, yeah,
Yes.
I beg your pardon.
Wonderful. And Charla is very talented on the harp. And already she's going around and playing for weddings on her harp.
Their youngest is Danner, and all these names that are in Scott and Stan's family have biblical origins and have biblical meanings and so forth. But Danner is musically a flutist, however you want to say it. And he's presently involved in wrestling. And he'll develop into a fine wrestling champ too. And very likable, very talented fellow.
Now down to Gordon and Susie's children. First was Patrick, and he is married to Teresa, and they just returned from France, where they went over there to teach English. And I guess they were gone about 6 or 7 months. But he went to Quebec on his mission, where he learned French. So he was very excited to go back to France to teach over there.
Then their oldest daughter is Jacqueline, and she's a traveling nurse. She travels with her husband Jason from various spots to fulfill nursing responsibility, and they're doing very well. And they're very talented people.
They're oncology. Neil, I think. Neil Newborns. And then Mikhail is their next daughter. And she works as a travel specialist, almost like a travel agent, you might say, for people. Go ahead.
And Jackie is our pianist musically, and she did very well. And all-state pianist for the jazz group for Woods Cross High School. Mm-hmm. And she's done very well. And she's all set to go up to BYU, Idaho this coming year.
And Melissa, we kind of felt she was our interior decorator. It seemed like she's always redecorating her bedroom. And I was so amazed at some of her drawings. They were just like a three-dimensional. She was wonderful.
And then their youngest is Gordy. He's our weapons collector. He's got already a collection of knives and
swords.
Awards, and he does very well with them. Uh-huh. And he researches them to know something about them.
Too, and he's going to be BYU's running back someday for football. I'm looking forward to that.
We're now up to Kevin and Anita's family, and they're very active right now with the pageant back in Palmyra. In fact, Joseph Daniel, their oldest son, is back there, part of the work crew. And he was there last year as part of the work crew. And so he made introductions for them, so that Kevin and all the family are back there now as part of the
pageant.
Yeah.
But Joe is very talented, and he made a video presentation that he won a big award for in school. And Crystal, she's one of our grandchildren that's active in sports. And she's a track star, and she goes out and runs all the time. She is about 17.
Then there's Johnny. He's our peacemaker, and he does very well with that. And he's very quiet, and you don't think much is going on with him until he opens his mouth, and he's right there. Very talented boy. In fact, we just got through ordaining him. What, to a
No, it's
teacher?
Caleb, teacher, yes. But we just finished ordaining Caleb deacon.
Caleb, he's like, they say he's like me. He's a neatnik, like me. Everything's right in its place, and he's very upset if it doesn't stay in its place. That's
All
like
these
me.
little cars are in a row. And then Joshua. Joshua is our youngest grandchild. What about Joshua?
Well, he has a fabulous memory. He's like
Scotty?
Scotty, he never forgets anything. In fact, he remembers things he never knew about.
Well, they're all just real special. And we feel that we have awesome grandchildren and adorable great-grandchildren.
And we count them as our collective blessings to go with our genealogy. And we are so pleased that, as best we can determine, they're all staying strong and choosing the right.
Well, and like our own children, choosing great mates, I think our grandchildren are just as talented. They've chosen wonderful spouses, as you might say. So they're making our family grow.